Okay, welcome to Chapter 18, Age of the City. These are the highlights. We're going to talk about the industrial growth, in particular the growth of the cities during the Gilded Age here in the late 1800s, and then we'll get into some of the leisure activities and culture toward the end. Okay, so what made people become attracted to the cities? Um, a lot of it is from immigration. Remember, immigration at this point starts to come from Southern and Eastern Europe. Okay, so again, Italians, Slavs, Jewish folks. You also get some migration, well, actually, part of the continuing migration from the farms to the city. That's a trend that had been started probably early 1800s. As mechanization increases, as efficiency increases, they just need fewer people on the farms, and they're moving to the cities. Okay, and that includes women as well. Okay, so here's the urbanization of America. Again, 1900. You can see very few cities with more than 1 million people. Here's the population growth, again, growing exponentially. And the population growth, let me point this out, and it'll probably come up again later. It's not just that people are there and they're workers, but those are also people that are buying things, right? So they become markets as well. So that's an important component of it. Okay, so the ethnic city, it's diverse. There's lots of different groups that are coming there, so it's not just one immigrant group, but several. Um, So when you think about it, when you think of like Little Italy in New York City or Chinatown or the old Greek town here or Hamtramck here in Michigan that used to be where the Polish folks lived. What's the benefit of the ethnic communities? You are in a place where where your language is spoken. Stores there sell your foods, sell probably newspapers of some sorts that are in your language. You have relatives that live there. Okay, you can probably get a job there somewhere without having to know English very well. Not being very, you don't need to be fluent in English. It's kind of like that last sentence. The drawback is, however, of course, you are in this enclave, so your ability to learn English and learn American ways are kind of limited because you're surrounded by uh, your old ways. Okay, and again, this is 1860 to 1900. See fewer Irish, fewer German. Now we're starting to get people from other parts of the Europe. Okay, so assimilation. How does assimilation take place? Um, Assimilation, and really assimilation, we're talking about Americanizing folks, right? How do you become quote unquote American? They start using American products. Okay, chicken soup. I have the label. This is a more modern version, but drinking Starbucks, Coca-Cola, eating at McDonald's. That's Americanization. You get exposed to the religion. Okay, so here in America at that time, it's primarily Protestant. Um, so you learn in the church how to conduct yourself as an American. The educational system. So that's how you learned English. That's how you learned your other subjects, but really how you learn to socialize here in America. And of course, what that leads to is this conflict with uh, first and second generation. So first generation is the generation that comes over here, and they typically want you to stick to the old way of doing things. This is what they know. But the second generation is the generation that's born here, and they want to eat McDonald's, and they don't want to eat the same old stuff that mom's always cooking, right? They want to drink Coca-Cola instead of drinking water. So there's always that conflict, probably still true today between any first and second generation families. The urbanization, you can see class segregation in Milwaukee. We're just going to kind of skip through that. Of course, just like in previous times, when you have an influx of immigrants, you also have a rise of nativism. And really, same reasons as always. They're taking jobs, they're willing to work for less, speak a different language, have a different religion sometimes, have different customs that people think are strange. And so there's a movement to restrict immigration. So you get a couple of different types. The American Protective Association, they want just to ban all immigration. Okay, just close the doors, no new immigrants coming to America. Um, then you get, to a lesser extent, the Immigration Restriction League. Immigration Restriction League said we should screen immigrants, like give them a literacy test. Okay, and the Immigration Restriction League kind of created this, in their minds, there was a separation between desirable and undesirable people. Okay, and that's kind of the debate we have today about religion. Some people want to just totally shut out all religion, but then some people floated out the idea of having some kind of litmus test for who can come here. So if you have a PhD or you're a scientist of some sort, we'll let you in here. But if you're a refugee, then we don't want you here. Okay. Okay. And again, they serve as a cheap labor force. Um, so they are willing to work less. A lot of times they're just, happy to have a job. So they provide a constant pressure, downward pressure on salaries, which again is some of the resentment that people have against them. Okay, this gives you a sense of the anti-immigration sentiment. Okay, so if you can't read, it says riffraff immigration to floating towards American shores, and poor Uncle Sam here is clinging to the American ideas and institutions. Quickly to be, or possibly to be overrun by this immigrant wave. Okay, so now that we have crowded cities, what do we do? How do you create space for people in the crowded city so it's not just a cement and jungle there? One of the things we have is the green space in the city. So Frederick Law Olmsted, Central Park. If you've ever been to Central Park in New York City, it's this big park right in the middle of the city. And so if you go to top of Rockefeller Center, you can see that, yeah, it is all just big buildings all around it, and all of a sudden there's this like big rectangle of green space. So that provides a way for people to enjoy outdoors in a cleaner setting. Um, City Beautiful movement. So instead of having the city just kind of pop up as it goes and it's disorganized and the streets are a jumble, that they actually do some layout of the city. Okay, and the modern version of this is, if you think about it, so you have your residential neighborhoods where your homes are probably, and then you have commercial zones. That's where the stores and restaurants are. And then you have like light industrial, where there might be some factories or some warehouses and things like that. And that's this idea of an organized city, so that way you don't have a McDonald's in the middle of your neighborhood. I know some of you guys are saying that'd be great. It's like, no, it wouldn't, because you'd have people driving through your neighborhood at all hours. Oh, there's a picture of Central Park. So from top of Rockefeller Center, you can see how it's just this big green open area in the midst of a sea of concrete there. Okay, so for the people with more money, what they do is they move out to the suburbs. Okay, it's not the suburbs like we have here, but suburbs is like the first outer ring from the city. Okay, and so you need transportation to be able to move out there, and we will talk about that in a second. For the poor, they got put into these dumbbell tenements. Pictures here at the right. Dumbbell tenements. There was a contest actually to design a building that would allow access to air, but fit as many people as possible. And this is what they came up with. So there's an air shaft in the middle, so technically they have access to the outside air, even though that air in there is pretty musty and smelling because people are throwing garbage in there. But the poor people live in these tenements. And Jacob Riis has a well-known book, picture book, How the Other Half Lives. And so one of the problems, if you combine these two ideas, people that move out to the suburbs, they are really unaware to a large extent in terms of how poor people live, right? They don't live by them anymore. It's kind of akin to what we have today. So Jacob Riis went around in these tenements and he took pictures of these folks um, and documented it. And then people really could see how the other half live. Okay, so transportation problems or transportation, how do you get out of the city? Um, the roads aren't very good. And so what you get is mass transit. The elevated railroads, like many of you guys have been to Chicago, the L is elevated railroads, subways, trolley cars like we have here on the right, suspension bridges. And all this helps facilitate movement in and out of the city. So now they can expand. Okay, so if you have money, you leave the city, and then who's left in the middle, it tends to be the poorer folks. Picture the Brooklyn Bridge. At that time, it was an engineering marvel. Some people have said this actually looks like a stained glass window in a church of sorts. It's such a marvel. Okay, gives you a sense of the suburbs, and you guys, and that is just really we are in a continuation of that pattern, right? So when the suburbs there get crowded, you move further out. So like if you talk to folks from like the 1970s, Wayne and Redford, were the happening suburbs. That's where people moved to. And then over time, people started leaving Wayne and Redford and started moving out further to Plymouth and to Canton. And Canton's still growing, right? So you get a sense of that in one point. At some point, Canton will kind of fill up, and then people will keep on going to whatever is next out there. Okay, so not only is the city crowded, and so you can move out with the transportation out to the suburb, but you can also move up. And we get the skyscraper. And the skyscraper is really possible because of the advancements in steel technology that allow for the frame to be built and to hold that weight, and possible by elevators. So you think about all these floors up, you can't live that high if you don't have an elevator to help you get up there. So, okay, that's what I just said. Fire and disease, we're going to go over this just briefly. So they started having professional fire departments, um, professional police departments, the word about air pollution, the public health service. And so this needs to be organized now, okay? As the cities are becoming more crowded and dirty, you really need to have a plan for public sanitation. And they start developing it at about this time. In terms of urban poverty, so the debate is who should help, and it's the same debate today. Who should be helping with urban poverty? Should it be private charities or should it be government? And back then, the answer is private charities. Okay, and so for instance, the Salvation Army, um, they help the deserving poor. Okay, and that should beg the question: well, who is deserving of aid? Just the people that are hardworking but don't have enough. Those people without. Um, and so that really becomes this debate, and still today, because there's a fear if you give people something for nothing, they'll become dependent and they will always be needing aid. You know, it's like that parable, like you teach a man to fish, he can eat for a day. You teach a man how to fish, he can eat forever. That's the debate. Okay, of course you have crowded cities, you have higher crime rates. I think that's just the more people you get in one area, that just tends to happen. More people, more problems, right? And the rise of professional police. Okay, so looking at the politics of it, so what we have is we have all these immigrants living in the cities. You have political machines and political bosses. A political machine is just the organization. The boss is the guy at the head of it. And what they would do is um, they would find these immigrants at the dock. Like literally, there's nobody greeting them there, right? There's nobody showing them around. It's like you're just kind of on your own right away. And so what they do is the machines will go help those folks. They will, um, help them find a place to live, help them get a job, stuff like that. In exchange, they just want their votes. And to the immigrant, this seems to be pretty good trade, right? The vote doesn't cost me anything, uh, and yet he's helping me find a place to live, find a place to work, get out of the trouble with the police if I get in trouble. Maybe even give me a turkey at Christmas time. What's in it for the boss, though, is the graft and corruption. Okay. So graft and corruption, because they are the people helping make the rules and awarding contracts, they can do things like honest graft. Honest graft is so if they know they're going to build a building over, this vacant lot, um, they might buy that lot. And so when they buy that lot, and now they need to, the city needs to purchase it to build the building, they can charge more. Okay, and they say that's honest because, like, I didn't do anything wrong. I just bought it like anybody else, but it's probably unethical because you knew what was going to happen. In terms of kickbacks and bribes, kickbacks are you get some money, so if you give a contract to my company, I might slide you $500,000, or I might just give you that money ahead of time, a bribe to, have you choose my company. Okay. And so the reason why the boss rule kind of shows up at this time, one, it's that rapid growth of the cities combined with the influx of immigrants. And, for the immigrants, this seems to be cost free. For the bosses, they would say, who really cares? And who's really hurt by this? It is the middle class because they're the ones that are paying for this, essentially paying for the government. Um, so they're the ones that are most hurt by it. At the right, you have a picture of the one of the famous political machine in New York, Tammany Hall, and Boss Tweed. He was actually undone by Thomas Nast, a cartoonist. Okay, the problem is a lot of immigrants couldn't work, or couldn't read, but they could understand political cartoons to some degree. And so Thomas Nast, a cartoonist, brought down Boss Tweed with his cartoon. They actually hired him, or they offered to hire him to get him to stop, but he would not. Okay, so we get to that's the political side of it. Here is the mass consumption, kind of the social aspects of it. Middle class. So package of income, you have rising incomes for most people, all people. Everyone's income is going up. They're not the same, but they're all going up. Okay, so merchandising techniques, you get this personal style. So instead of just wearing whatever you can, now you might have a quote unquote style. Um, and you think about who can have a style is the people that can afford and actually be picky about what clothes they have, for instance, right? And that means you have to have enough money. If you don't have enough money, you're just going to wear whatever you can. We get the advent of new things, canned foods, frozen foods, okay, and that entices people to buy. Okay, you also get the rise of chain stores and mail order houses. So chain stores, it's just kind of like what it sounds, and I mean I think we're pretty accustomed to them now. You have a Walmart all across the country and Targets all across the country. The mail order homes. This is something that if you ask your grandparents, they would probably remember more so. Maybe even your parents. So Sears Roebuck used to be one of the biggest department stores around, and every year they would mail this catalog. And in the catalog, they had toys, they had clothes, and family sets of Christmas pajamas available. And as I remember, there was a really, really, really little kid um, looking at those a little bit, and those were always kind of fun. It's just colorful pictures of toys that look fun. Um, so that is good for the middle class. Who it really hurts those are the small town stores, right? So if you're a small town store, you can't offer the selection, probably can't offer the prices that like a Sears Roebuck does. And it's akin to what we have today with Walmart. So Walmart actually started off opening up just in small towns in America. And when they started opening up in small towns in America, they destroyed the local shops, right? If you're the local tailor, there's no way you compete with Walmart. If you're the local um, shoe seller, there's no way you compete with Walmart. Okay. But the impact of this back then, it does bring a sense of modernity to the rural areas. Oops, chain stores, mail order catalogs, which kind of repeats what I just said. Okay, the department stores. So again, department stores tend to hurt the smaller areas. Um, and what it does is it sets up this idea of shopping not just as going to buy things, but it's an experience. Okay, you go shopping to have an experience, much like you'd go to Cedar Point to have an experience. Um, so shopping, yeah, it's a destination. It's a thing to do. Okay, and because many of the women are consumers, they also will turn around and hire women as the retailers, right? You don't want to buy your perfume from some burly guy named Joe. You want to buy your perfume from someone else who might understand perfume a little bit better back then. So, okay, so the women were also workers, and then you get the rise of the National Consumers League, who was trying to improve, like it says, wages and work conditions for women. Unfortunately, because they're seen as like secondary breadwinners, sometimes stores felt like they could take advantage of them because their families wasn't depending on them for their income. Okay, when we get into the cultural aspect, the highbrow, lowbrow, middlebrow are. So highbrow art or highbrow culture is like kind of the intellectual academic type culture. Lowbrow is simple entertainment that relies on just usually like bodily noises and such. And middle brow is somewhere in between. Okay, so new conceptions of leisure. Okay, and so what they used to think of like if you had time, if you're sitting around, you're lazy, right? You could be doing something else with yourself. And so now, instead of thinking of you're lazy, that because you're working 70 hours a week or 60 hours a week, that leisure time is desirable. Remember, this is part of that definition of middle class. It's good to have leisure time. And so, like in New York City, you would have the Coney Islands, kind of what we see here, the rides, people, movies. You can go in, people with games. And this is, just This is kind of like the lowbrow culture stuff. You just go there to be entertained, right? It's you go on a ride, Ferris wheel. It's amusing. Um, that's what people did. You have some time off, you go there. You get the rise of spectator sports. Okay, so Major League Baseball, like it says, college football, basketball, boxing. And just take a step back for a second. If you think about spectator sports, for them to be successful, you have to have people with money that can afford a ticket, and you have to have people with time that can go see these events. And so that's why spectator sports now, at this particular time in U.S. history, when you have that growing middle class, in part because of industrialization, and not some earlier point in American history. Okay, you get musical theater, you get ethnic theaters that cater to uh, the folks from back home. Yeah, vaudeville is just a variety of acts, variety shows, kind of like many of you guys go to the Variety Is. I think the Salem Rocks cheerleading squad puts that on. It's just shows. Some people sing, some people dance, some people sing and dance. And this is in the South where you get the use of blackface, late 1800s. Okay, when it comes to movies, the movies again, um, the original movies are actually really simple. They're just like kind of moving pictures, which was stunning back then. And if you guys were conscious when like VR came around, virtual reality came around, like you would look in virtual reality goggles and it would be like a picture of a waterfall. That's like the early movies. Then they progressed into silent movies. And so you would have motion pictures, but then you'd have to have captions on the bottom. And then we get into talking movies. And one of the first popular breakout movies was Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. And this kind of helped, well, this helped revitalize the image of the Ku Klux Klan. And so now the Ku Klux Klan became these heroic folks that, again, protected white women from brute savages. And I mean, it was so popular back then that Woodrow Wilson actually screened it in the White House. Okay, that's part of like the black marks on his record. So working class leisure, oops, it's Birth of a Nation. A lot of times they would hang out at the saloon, and not just for drinking, but the saloon would be like the political center. That's where people talk politics. That's where folks from your homeland would gather. Sometimes it would be there for entertainment. Okay, I'm trying to think about, what is that place today? Depends on your experience. Some coffee shops are like that. Okay, where it's not obviously just selling coffee. Sometimes they have entertainment. Sometimes they have poetry readings and things like that. In certain communities, the barber shop is like that. So that's where you go to talk politics, and you go to talk with folks like you um, about stuff that affects your community. Okay, so you think in all these different things, what binds Americans together? It really is the celebration of the Fourth of July. Okay, and the Fourth of July, it's a unifying, it is the tie that binds all Americans. So no matter where you're from, what your background is, celebrating the Fourth of July unified us culturally. Okay, in terms of mass communications, we get the growth um, in newspaper chains. Again, it's the national press, and a lot of this is tied in again with the middle class. So you have people that are educated, and now they can become, and the average folk can become more educated because newspapers are more widely available and people are willing to buy them. Okay, so all this kind of fits together in terms of rise of the middle class leads to these economic developments leads to the rise of the middle class. We'll have political effects. We'll have social effects. We'll have cultural effects. When it comes to literature, so this is a pivot. Last time we talked about literature, it was Romanticism back in the early 1800s. It's going to turn to realism now. And realism is they are trying to describe sometimes the ugly side of reality, right? So it's not a Hollywood type ending. These are things that challenges that people face. Okay, so it talks about poverty, talks about slums, um, and just not sugarcoat it so people can address those problems of the day. Okay, when it comes to art, you get the Ashcan School in New York City. Again, it depicts Ashcan art depicts the realities of the area. So this is a boxing match that happens in the city. They might show an alleyway in the city. Um, And again, it is not to glorify anything. It is really just trying to show it like it is. Can you think about that today? What kind of stuff keeps it real? A lot of the movies, I guess, are realistic in that sense, and there's not always that happy ending. Some songs that don't sugarcoat anything, but they talk about social problems of the day. Okay, then you get Darwinism, and so Darwinism um, has this idea of natural selection, and so there's a growth of science and knowledge at this in this particular era, and Darwin being part of this. And so, how do we understand species to evolve? It is not God, and so this kind of undermines Christianity a little bit. It's not God creating this, but through natural selection. Okay. Other sciences, there's scientific ideas that we get, or actually, this is probably more of a sociological idea. Pragmatism. So, how do you know something is true or not true? Well, you kind of use experience to justify it. So, it's not all just philosophical. If it doesn't play out in the real world, then maybe it's not true. Okay, other fields that came up, anthropology is the study of past cultures, economics. So there's no economics prior to this. People kind of understood it, but sometimes they're wrong, and you'll figure that out when you take econ yourselves. U.S. history, Frederick Jackson Turner. You get sociology, you get psychology. All are developed at this time, and they're developed in the universities. Okay, universal schooling. So again, if you remember the common school back in the mid 1800s, we're taking the next step here. So public education, that was more elementary level schooling. They expanded now junior high level schooling. There's more schooling, not necessarily for African Americans in the rural areas, but for everyone else. There's land grant institutions. So like Michigan State is a land grant institution. States carve out, the government carves out these universities. They use them to study, one of the derisive nicknames for Michigan State is like MooU, to study agricultural techniques. And then we also get the expansion of women's colleges. Okay, so women's colleges didn't want them mingling with men, but they should be educated. Okay, and so this is a big step in terms of building equality for women because now they have access to higher education. So hopefully you enjoyed today's lecture. Don't forget to buy the merch, and we will see you next time.